We all have times of sorrow and pain in our lives. We all have days of fear or stress or confusion as to what God is doing. But when we do, my hope is that we can learn to respond to all of our circumstances like King David did, because his focus was not on just this life alone. He never thought that the things happening to him were just random events in his life. He knew God. He knew God was his refuge, and he knew God had a plan. Today, let's see what we can learn from David. Welcome to our Psalm series. Glad you're joining us today. We are actually on Psalm chapter 16. I'll begin here. We were watching Heartland the other night, and one of the characters in the program had cancer. And it was now in remission, but as she was talking, this is what she said. She said, "What I learned from cancer is that we really have no control over anything, and so we need to live life as its fullest while we're here." Now, when she said that, two things struck me. One was that her focus was on this life only. And two was that she thought everything just happened randomly in her life. And when I heard her say that, I realized that that's how most people think. But then I realized that the peace that I have in my life, I have it because I don't think like that. But that's not how it's always been for me. I remember a time when the kids were really, really little, and I was sitting on the laundry room floor, and I felt a lump in the back side of me. And I remember being terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, what if it's cancer? What if I die? How could the kids live without me? How could Rob live without me? What would everybody do without me? And looking back, that makes sense because the focus of my life back then was not on God. God was not my refuge. It never would have occurred to me to trust him with this thought. There wasn't any God in the picture. If there was, I would just maybe show up to church every so often. That was kind of my theory on God. I had no idea how to trust him. I had no idea how to know him. And because of that, I became fearful of everything. But I'm going to tell you this. My life changed when I got to know God. It just did. When I learned something valuable, that God is sovereignly in control of this world, politicians, presidents, what happens in my life day to day, I realized things aren't random. And when I started seeing God is sovereign, then I began seeing, okay, if that's true, then he created me for a purpose, for such a time as this. And he'll keep me on this earth as long as he needs me, and then I'm going home to be with him. But when we begin to see that, we begin to understand that God really honestly does what he promises, that he would cause all things, good or bad, to work for good for his purpose. What happened is my focus began to change. And I began to realize why Jesus said it's so important to seek first the kingdom of God. To love God first, not my job, not my house, not the ministry, not things, but truly love God with all of my heart, my soul, and my mind. Because then I can live at peace, no matter what happens in my life. Because as I know him more and more, my desire for him is first and foremost, and I'm trusting him with my life. I don't think for 1 minute that anything that happens in my life is random. Life or death doesn't really matter, because I have learned that what's beyond death as a follower of Jesus is way better than this life on this earth. But on this earth, we have a job. We should be a light to others. We should have peace. And when we have peace in a chaotic world, others are going to want to know Jesus just like we did. That's just our job as a follower of Christ. But we will never ever get to that point if we don't spend time getting to know him and know that he created us and nothing is random. He has a purpose for every event, good or bad, tragedy, loss, heartache, whatever. He has a plan for that. And when David had written this psalm, He had spent so much time getting to know God that he understood this too. So I want us to learn a few quick lessons today of what we can learn from David. Let's start Psalm 16. It says, a Michtam of David. Now, nobody really knows what a Michtam meant. It's kind of speculation at this point. But whatever caused David to write this particular psalm, we don't even know the time period. But it seems like whatever time he's writing, his life is at a really tough place. Maybe this was when he was on the run from King Saul. Maybe this is when his son Absalom took over his throne and David had to leave Jerusalem. Maybe this was when David was working for and lying to the king of Israel's enemy, the Philistines. Regardless of the time, the point is we all have times of distress in our life. We all have days of fear, confusion, stress, all of those things. But I really want us to learn how to respond like David did. Verse 1, Psalm 16 says this, keep me safe, O God, for in you I take refuge. I love how he starts this. It's a great lesson for all of us. One, to make God our refuge. Refuge means a place to put your trust in. It's keeping you safe and secure. Refuge means to put trust in God, to confide in or hope in God. In other words, when God is our refuge, we aren't trusting our boss or spouse or parent or child or friend. We're trusting and hoping in God alone to make sure we have what we need. So for David, this is his first thought in this psalm. Now, a prayer for safety, he says, keep me safe, O God. But he isn't asking really for a military or for bodyguards. He says this, in you alone, God, do I take refuge. Because David knew that God could keep him safe. God could stop the attack. God could change a heart. God could change a circumstance. God could miraculously do anything. I learned this, and I think I used the same illustration a few lessons back, but we have new people watching all the time. So I'm going to tell you this again, and which hence is why I have an airplane behind me. Okay, there's a reason for this today. When our son and daughter-in-law wanted to move to Texas, they had this one area that they wanted to live in, close to a school, close to the church they wanted to go to. No rentals were coming on the market. So they found a house in a different area. They had to sign a contract by like 3 o'clock the following day. Right before they signed it, a new house came on the market. They loved it. They wanted this new house. They put an offer in and they didn't get it. All right. It was a really stressful time for them. But we all knew that God could change hearts. So we were praying that the house that they liked, that God would change that owner's heart. We prayed and prayed and prayed. But we finally heard back from the house that they wanted, and the owner went with the other people and not our son. And they were really, really sad. But it was so amazing to watch my daughter-in-law, because she finally said to me, you know what, Lisa, I just surrendered this whole situation to God. She made God her refuge. She said, you know what, I'm trusting him. He knows where I need to live. He knows what house we need to live in. I'm going to trust him to make sure that that happens. She knew this. God was her refuge. God had a reason. God knew something she didn't know. And she trusted him for whatever house became available. And what she said made her at peace. Probably sad because she didn't get the house she wanted, but faith that God was in it. When we have faith that God is in it, somehow that just gives us complete and total peace in our life. She believed that God would do what he needed to do. It wasn't just random that the owners, nixed them and chose someone else. She just knew God. She knew that at any point, if God wanted her to have the house she wanted, he could change the situation, which God actually did. They had a family trip planned to Florida a couple days after they signed the lease on the house they didn't want. And their flight was connecting through South Carolina. But the day before they were to leave, the airline canceled their reservations and said, the soonest you can get on a plane to Florida is 2 days later. They were devastated. But their new flight was connecting now through Dallas, not South Carolina. And it had a 3-hour layover. just enough time to get off the plane, get an Uber, get to the house that they rented that they didn't even think they liked. And that's exactly what they did. They got there and they hated the house that they signed a lease on even more than they did before they saw the actual house. And Shayla was just crying. She's like, I don't like this house. And so what happened was they went to the house that they wanted. And they called their realtor. And they said, here's the deal. I want to cancel this house over here. And miraculously, the homeowner never even signed the lease, so they could get out of that. And this house over here, they said, let's put in a new offer. Maybe they never signed with the original people yet. We don't know. And so they did that. And the guy accepted their offer. But what was amazing is the airplane. The amazing thing is that God is so big, and when you make him our refuge, he can do anything. And he miraculously canceled their flights that went through South Carolina to Florida, so that they would go through Dallas and have a 3-hour layover so they could go and make this work to where God wanted it to work. But it was so fun to watch, because through this process, Micah and Shayla surrendered their will to God. And God gave them what they wanted. But that doesn't always happen. You know that, I know that. It doesn't always happen that way. But what we do know is that sometimes God gives us what we need, not so much what we want. And God gives us what we need to give him the most glory. And the way this story unfolded, they will tell the story over and over and over again to show other people how big and powerful and sovereign their God is over. That he could even change an airline flight to make sure that they can get into the house that they wanted to. Now, for you, it might not have gone that way. Maybe for you it could look different. Maybe you prayed and prayed and prayed and you didn't get the job you wanted. Maybe you prayed and your spouse left anyway. Maybe you got cancer and you weren't expecting that. Maybe you had to file bankruptcy. But here's what you need to know. That in it, regardless of you get what you want or you don't, God still has a plan and he still has a purpose. The psalmist David goes on to say in verse 2, I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you, I have no good thing. I love this because I want us all to get to the point in our life where we say, God, you're all I need. You're all I want. I'm just living life in peace, knowing you're going to open and close the doors that need to be closed. But here's what we say probably every time we do a Psalms. That doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. And when David wrote this, I think he wrote it because all he had to do was look back over his life and see everything that God had done over and over and over again. David had spent many, many years out in the field singing and writing songs we know as the Psalms. We know David had a great relationship with God from the time he was young. So when David killed Goliath, he knew instinctively that it was all God, it wasn't him. When David was protected from Saul, he knew instinctively that it was all God, not him. David recognized God's hand personally in everything in his life. And see, when you and I can do that, when we can see God's hand personally in our life, then we begin to recognize that no matter what the trial, no matter what the hardship, no matter what the losses, no matter what, God becomes our refuge. He's our rock amidst the trials. We trust he's doing something. And when we get to that point, our circumstances become secondary to trusting that God has a purpose. Our circumstances become secondary to trusting God has a purpose. And we start thinking like David did, apart from you, I have no good thing. The second thing we learn through this psalm is this: find good, godly friends. Verse 3 says this, as for the saints, David says, who are in the land, they are the glorious ones in whom are all my delight. David loved fellow believers, and we should too. He loved to be around those who loved God. And this was just a reminder to me that Christian friends are really, really necessary. They need to help us, point us to good, godly ways of thinking and acting. We started a discipleship group in Phoenix, and it's one of the best things that I think I've ever done, because I can actually sit at a table and get to know the saints. And I feel like David, it's a delight to see how God has changed and is changing their lives. Their stories of how God saved them or changed them or came through for them renews my faith. So find some good, true Christian friends, because on the other hand, David sees sorry, David, stop that. Find some good, true Christian friends. Pause. But on the other hand, David saw the other side of this. David didn't want to hang around people who didn't follow God. Verse 4 says this, the sorrows of those will increase who run after other gods. I will not pour out their libations of blood or take up their names on my lips. He's saying, I don't want to hang out with people who don't believe the same way I do. The third thing is David thanked the Lord for his blessings. That's what David did. He thanked the Lord for his blessings. Verse 5, Lord, you have assigned me my portion and my cup. You have made my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. Some people read that and they go, well, my boundaries have not fallen well for me. I have nothing. Everything goes wrong in my life. I'm not getting well. I have no financial help. And that list can go on and on. But God's blessing, they're not always physical and tangible. If you're a follower of Jesus, you are secure and your home is in heaven. Our inheritance is for all eternity. Doesn't mean you're going to have everything you want here on earth, but we can still rejoice and be thankful. We were riding bikes in California this summer, and we ride by this really expensive stretch of homes right on the beach. And I always wonder who lives in those homes, because they can have money and they can have mansions here on this earth. And that does not mean that the lines have fallen in pleasant places for them. That means that they may have a lot of money, but that doesn't compare to those who know Jesus. Another one of his blessings is this. He says in verse 7, I will praise the Lord who counsels me, even in the night, my heart instructs me. I love this verse because I can think of 3 specific times when Rob was working on a business deal, and it was like God counseled him in the middle of the night, literally woke him up, shook him out of bed, and said, do not do that deal. It was a reminder that God does not sleep, okay? And if he needs to make something clear to us, he can even wake us up in the middle of the night to show us that. Here is the key. David tells us the key in life. Verse 8, I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. The key is to set the Lord before us. Think of this, before we make a decision, before we take a job, before we marry that person, before we do anything, David reminds us to seek the Lord first. Set the Lord before us first. Ask him, wait for him, trust him, look to him, seek him. When our son and his wife were moving to Texas, they set the Lord before them. And every step, God just kept opening the doors and opening them. But they set him first. They sought him first. It reminded me of Moses when he was leading the people for those 40 years. He was asking God a question. Exodus 33:14, the Lord replied, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. He's saying, Moses, my presence, I'm going to be with you. And Moses said something so amazing. He said, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. In other words, I don't want to go anywhere if God is not in it. Verse 9 in Psalm says this, therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. David was completely convinced that there would be an eternity waiting for him. There was no fear in death for him. And whatever David was concerned about in verse 1, when he said, keep me safe, O God, for in you I take refuge, David ended his psalm saying, death or life, it doesn't matter. God, keep me safe, don't keep me safe. My life is yours. I'm trusting you. And when we can get to that place of making God our refuge, we can say the exact same thing that David did. Verse 11, the last verse says this, you have made known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. If we want joy in his presence, David tells us what to do. Make God our refuge, find good godly friends, thank the Lord for his blessings, and always set the Lord before us. This psalm is a reminder that God is intimately involved in our day-to-day life, but we don't ever want to forget to include him in everything, even airplanes. Hope that helps. Have a really good day.